Hello everyone, welcome back to Old Soul Podcast. My name is Bree, that's spelled B-R-E-I. Thank you so much. Today's film commentary is about the film Anatomy of a Fall. It has a runtime of 2 hours and 31 minutes. It's rated R, and it was released in 2023. And the director's name is Justine Triet. This is a French film, so you will have to watch it with subtitles, but on and off there are English words and use of the English language throughout the film. It's just kind of scattered. Okay, so I'm going to kind of give a summary and then give my commentary and notes in between that like I usually do. This is going to be a long one because this felt like a thriller, murder, mystery that had a lot of ambiguity. And of course, while paying attention to those visual details, I also had to pay attention to the subtitles. So there was a lot going on, but I did feel like this was a really good film. And after watching it, I do think that I would have put this on the best films of 2023 if I had watched it before 2023 had ended. So here we go. Okay, so basically the plot or some sort of short summary is that this film focuses in on a family that lives in somewhat of a secluded home. Sort of looks like a cabin that's not finished being renovated, near the mountains. It appears to be winter during the time that this accident or murder takes place, due to all the snow in the surrounding areas. There's a father, a mother, and a son who is blind, and a trusty canine companion named Snoop, who does make quite the appearance throughout the film. For the characters, I'm just going to refer to them as mom, wife, dad, husband, and son. It's just a lot easier since there's so many details, but I don't want it to seem like I'm diminishing the characters to just their role as mother and wife, or father and husband and son. But it's just easier for my brain in terms of telling the story than saying their names over and over and over again with all the details of context. And I do think for this specific commentary that their roles as husband and wife, son, complicate a lot of the things that show up in the trial on whether we can trust them, or did they value that role, or did they not, and what was going on between the marriage and what was going on within that home that could have caused this accident or this murder. So, just a note. So the plot revolves around the sudden and strange death of the father. Test results come back, or otherwise after his body gets examined. It's inconclusive, but there were notes of blunt force trauma before the fall that could not have been along the way as he fell. Like when he's on the third floor, that also looks sort of like an attic that he was putting insulation into, and there's a window that was open and it looks as if he had fallen out. Or later you'll see that they assumed that it could be suicide since there were no other suspects besides the wife, and so they had to come up with some other idea. And then later we find out that there is some context and maybe the dad was suicidal and depressed. So the blunt force trauma is really what makes it seem more like homicide than suicide, and then an accident where he might have tripped, and the placement of where his body ended up didn't match up. So those are just things that they're finding right off the bat that sort of makes this accident very suspicious. Sadly, the son is the one who finds his father dead, so he comes back from a walk. He wasn't in the house at the time. He comes back from a walk with his dog Snoop, and he feels a body there, and he realizes that it's his father, and he screams out for his mother because his dad's not responding to him, so he knows something's wrong. We suspect that he fell from a window in an attic, third floor, that he was doing insulation on. It looks as though there was construction going on throughout the house, but mostly on the third floor. They apparently have lived in that home for about 2 years, which is something that I noted. Obviously, I already talked about where he fell and what scientific evidence was found on his body in comparison to physics and so on and so forth. But I noticed that the house looked like it still needed other renovations, and later it makes sense when they talk about the financial situation of the family. But apparently they've lived in that house for almost 2 years. It looks like the stairs, there's no like railing, or there's like a wood railing, but it looks like it's not done, and maybe it could be an aesthetic, but it looks more like it wasn't finished. And then the third floor, you can kind of see from the third floor down to like other rooms. Like, it just looks like the house needed a lot of work. And for them being there for 2 years, it's really kind of suspicious that it's taking so long. Although I know construction can take a long time, it seems as though the father was the one doing all the work, maybe to save money, but obviously there's only so much time in the day. Odd things that I sort of wondered about or pinpointed while watching the film, now that you have the summary of what's going on and sort of the things that are not adding up in the film. The husband played his music very loud while his wife was downstairs trying to do an interview with a lady that came quite far to interview her. Why was this happening? It's causing me to wonder what state their marriage was in. So the wife is like a writer, and I believe the husband is a writer too, but he's been a teacher or / professor for a long time, and he's just been sort of writing his book for years and years. And the wife has been publishing, and she also, I think, does like editing or translations for people on contracts and on a contractual or as a freelancer is more like it. But she was trying to interview, and this is how the scene sort of starts out, is where she's trying to get interviewed by someone in her own home in her living room, and then all of a sudden this loud instrumental comes on, and it's very demanding, it's very loud, it's very intrusive, it's very rude, and it's the husband who started the music. It's on loop, so he has no intention of pausing it, of turning it down. He knows that the interview is happening. He's clearly trying to disrupt the situation. And the interviewer looks uncomfortable. The wife looks annoyed and uncomfortable. They're trying to continue with the interview, and eventually the wife and the interviewer give up, and the wife decides to reschedule. And what's really bad about the interview is that the lady that came to interview the wife was trying to record it, so clearly the music was making that nearly impossible. And then the husband also during this time never comes downstairs. He never says anything. He just has the music up really loud. So that's really awkward, and it's not really showing a great picture of their marriage right off the bat. The wife was the only one home at the time of the accident. So this is just later in the film. I'm bringing up oddities that I noticed. The wife was the only one at home at the time of the accident, sorry. The son was out walking with the dog, and they don't appear to have any close neighbors, so I figured if we go further along in the film, we find out that this wasn't a freak accident, or I don't think it was, but it could have been, then the wife would not just be the number one suspect, she'd be the only suspect. Okay, so basically I noted that everyone is thinking basically is that the son wasn't home, he was out on a long walk with his dog. He said that sometimes he goes out when his parents are fighting. So this is another sign that the parents fight a lot, and maybe this time he went out because he heard them bickering, so on and so forth. And however you want to perceive that, right? And then the wife is the only one home with the husband at the time of the accident, unless some random stranger broke in, which is possible, but not likely, and they don't appear to have any neighbors close by, so it's suspicious for sure. And not only would the wife be a suspect in that case because she was the only one home, but they always suspect the partner first, or the person in a relationship first, because they're usually the closest person to the victim, so there's that too. Yeah, so another oddity was the financial problems, probably the number one stressful thing ever, and has surely caused many divorces for people, is something that I noted. So at some point we find out that they were having money problems. The wife was from Germany. She met the dad, or the husband, and then they got together. They lived in London. They had their kid. in London. She appeared to like London. I don't know if the husband liked it there, but they were there. He was teaching. They had their kid. But then their kid had an accident, and that sort of spiraled things out of control, and he lost his vision. So the son was not born blind. He had an accident that caused him to lose his vision at 4 years old, and the father was the one who was supposed to be responsible for him at that time. I think he picked him up late, or he was late and someone else picked him up and there was a whole accident. And the wife says that the husband felt guilty about that, and then there's a lot of he said, she said, so we can't assume that she's telling the truth. We just hope that she is, and her track record on telling the truth is not good, so I'll just give you that. Okay, so that's another oddity. So we find out another thing, that they had a fight the day before he died, and it was recorded, and she didn't tell her lawyer. I'm like, girl, really? So, actually, they did have a fight the day before. I don't know if that particular fight was the one that was recorded and used in the courtroom as evidence, but it does show another sign that they were fighting a lot, and then ultimately, even if this wasn't the video, that specific fight wasn't the one used in court as evidence. The one used in court as evidence was actually, it highlighted a few things. One, their relationship was not, it was definitely on the rocks. We found out that she was cheating on him and had cheated on him several times and caught her in a lie, even on the recording. One minute she was like, I didn't cheat on you, and then she said, well, I only cheated on you once. And then later in court, we find out that she cheated on him twice with the same person. It's just, she's such a liar, and it makes me, like, never want to trust her. We also find out that they get physical. Unfortunately, the recording only shows us, or gives way to, because we're only listening, that they fought and that it got violent. It wasn't just verbal, although verbal is just as problematic. But there's a highlighted danger in the violent aspects. And the film decides to be in the courtroom, letting us see everyone react to the recording, and then it cuts to the memory where we can physically see it happening and hear it, and then at the point that they start physically fighting, it cuts. So again, we have to depend on the wife in the courtroom and get her word for it on who hit who and what happened. And she takes some accountability and says, well, I slapped him. But then the other stuff was just him, like, hitting himself or hitting the wall. And it's like, well, is that true or is that not true? And that's the unfortunate thing about recordings, is you can't see it. So, interesting choice from the director. There's a lot of ambiguity and there's a lot of he said, she said that makes the film really good, but I do think at some point it kind of ruins the film. There's too much ambiguity and there's not enough hardcore facts. Even in the courtroom, sometimes it feels like they're just building a narrative, which makes sense. The job of the lawyers is to build a narrative that sort of highlights and goes back to the cause of the death or the possibility of a motive, but a lot of the time it felt like a circus and that we were losing our way. The judge sort of had to put people back on track. I know that sounds crazy, but honestly, if you watch the court scenes, you'll understand. So there's all that mess. Okay, the mom's lawyer is said to be a family friend, although they hadn't seen each other in a while. They seem to have a lot of tension, so I'm wondering if they dated in the past or they were just quote-unquote friends. My definition of friends is someone who you can be very intimate and close to, and you care for, and you've had a relationship with, but if you have slept with them, that friendship thing doesn't exist. Like, that's just takes it to a different level. Personally, that's what I think. And there's just some tension and some chemistry with them that just kind of makes me, And they never quite cross the boundary, but you always think that they will. I'm interested in what the lawyer truly thinks as things unfold. Will he defend her even if he finds out she's a murderer, since she's a friend, quote unquote friend? And from what I saw throughout the film, he did support her. There was no point where she said that I did it. She always claimed that she didn't kill her husband, and I don't know if he believed her. Sometimes I think he did suspect her, but there was never any proof. And even with that note that I said there was forged trauma before he fell out the window, they never had, like, proof through a weapon. It was just, yeah, this happened. So, interesting. So another note that I mentioned is when her lawyer first arrives at her house, he asks several questions, but one of her answers stood out the most, and he even has her repeat it as well. I'm paraphrasing, but he played the music really loud just to piss me off. Basically, that's what she tells him. And the lawyer goes back and is like, wait, to piss you off? And she's like, well, yeah, he intentionally played the music to make me mad. So again, you're seeing friction in the relationship. And one-sided because we don't have the husband's take on things, but it's still a red flag. Okay, physical signs that keep us guessing but aren't concrete evidence. The son is having a very hard time dealing with his father's death. Understandably, he's a child, he lost his dad tragically, and he was the one to find him. The mom was not as visibly distraught, but she did appear to be shaken up at some moments. She could be trying to keep it together for her child. She's an adult with a lot of responsibility, so that makes sense, especially now that she is the sole provider of her son. But I thought that was just something to know, and I do think it comes up a lot where people will base someone's innocence based off of the way that they're reacting, and I do think that there could be some signs of there being issues with that, but I don't think that it is a concrete way to have evidence or to know. Just things to mention. Why isn't the science adding up? This made me super suspicious of the wife. This gives the film such tension. Even if we, as the audience, feel that we know who did it, especially because of the evidence is leaning toward a certain someone, we want to see the truth unravel. Who can we trust? What really happened? Why? Will there be justice? So these were just questions that I had while watching the film, and I think throughout the film I suspected the wife, and even in the end I suspected the wife, and even after they gave a verdict, I still didn't trust a lot of people, and unfortunately I do feel like the ending was not fulfilling. But we'll move on. So the wife at some point, she does say that she doesn't believe that he would commit suicide. Like, in the beginning, she's like, there's no way, I just don't think he would do that, or at least not in this way, knowing that our son was home, blah, 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 blah. But then later, when the lawyer is like, well, I know there's a possibility that someone could have broken in and, like, did this. It's not probable, and no one's gonna believe you, and I don't believe you. So then she kind of backtracks, and she's like, well, it could have been suicide, and also, like, there was a time that he attempted it other times. And again, she doesn't have any proof, but she has her word, which is not known to be trustworthy. And so she sort of runs with that, and so that's another suspicious thing that happens among all of the suspicious things that happen. Okay. So some other notes to note about the film is that I hated the way that the cops treated the son, especially during the reenactment. At times it felt like they were being ableist, making assumptions because he was a child and blind and not just facts. It just didn't sit well with me. I suppose he could lie for his mom, and I even wondered if the director had left out a scene that would be played later on, giving us more context. But still, I didn't really like how they treated him, and they assumed. There was some point where he retracted his statement and he said that he got confused, and I feel like that's totally possible for a child who just had such a traumatic experience. But they were being very curt and short with him, and I didn't like it. The court bringing up the mom's sexuality to insinuate that she was flirting with the lady that interviewed her, which showed a motive or problems in the relationship, felt a little bit like a reach. The only reason why I feel like that could be somewhat justified is because she was a cheater and she had cheated on her husband, but they had no reason to suspect that this specific interview situation had anything to do with that. And at some point it just felt very wrong, and like they were trying to fit their narrative wherever they could, and I felt that it was rude and unjustified. I also want to note that at some point the wife states that she left one hell, which was her life in Germany, to be with a guy whom she loved, and they have this good life in London, and then they moved to his hometown when money was bad after their son's surgeries or medical health payments, and she felt like this had become her new hell that he had brought her to. And in a way, it sounds like she was quite resentful, which could have been motive, but occasionally some really cool angles appeared. The shot of the husband's body when the mom and the son are outside and she's making a phone call, and to like the emergency services, letting them know like something happened. That shot was kind of interesting. And the son being interrogated and recorded by the police. The cop's head was taking up a lot of the frame at some points. Just thought that was an interesting choice on the director's part. The courtroom scene when the son is centered in the frame and being asked questions, but the camera moves with him while the adults argue/dispute with each other, but we only see him, not them. So we're really moving with him with every head turn, which is really cool to watch. The song that was playing at the beginning of the film and throughout the film kept reminding me of 50 Cent's Pimp. And then when it's mentioned later in the film as a direct hit toward the wife, being that it was loud and disruptive, rude, and the husband never came downstairs to introduce himself, which I had already mentioned, and it played on a loop, which I also mentioned. My God, what a way to start a film. Also, yeah, I would have been pissed too, but not enough to push him out of the window. So these are just things that I noted, like, I would have been mad, but I wouldn't have pushed him out of the window, If she did. There's no proof that she did, but still, it's suspicious. And yeah, imagine you're hearing, like, this 50 Cent instrumental throughout the whole song, and I'm like, oh, it's just me because maybe 50 Cent sampled it, which maybe he did, but it's just connected to 50 Cent, and you're like watching this film not expecting to think about 50 Cent, and then it's brought up in the film. It's so chaotic, but I love that it's chaotic. Okay, and then I wish we had gotten to know a bit of who the father was aside from people's stories or opinions. I didn't trust the wife. The son, of course, loved his father, so I feel that the only trusted opinion could have come from like his therapist or psychologist. But then a lot of those people who did show up in court and gave their testimonies about their experiences with the husband and what he said also felt sort of one-sided and judgy and not like professional doctor speak. So I don't know. I don't really know who to trust. I wish we had gotten more of the husband before he was essentially murdered or committed suicide. So my biggest question to everyone who will essentially go and watch this film and maybe have some similar thoughts that I did, or even while listening to this recording, and you sort of want to know what happened in the end, I don't know. So, of course, I give spoilers because I don't like talking about films without having spoilers because it ruins the whole point of talking about the film unless it's a new release series where I'm trying to motivate you to go see the film in theaters. The wife gets, I believe it's acquitted, so she does not get charged with homicide or anything. She gets off scot-free. She's good. And I mean, it's not scot-free because she had to put her personal life out there and be somewhat judged for every little mistake or anything that ever happened, and that isn't something that anyone would really want to do. And her son, there was a little bit of distrust and some fear there, so it's not scot-free at all, but it's definitely still better than being in jail, right? And so I think that the ruling is that it's probably suicide that happened, or he just fell on accident, but the wife does not get charged for murder. And so my question is, what do you think happened? What do you believe happened after watching this film and having all this laid out to you, not in my summary, but in the way that the film decides to tell you and you're seeing it for yourself and you're hearing it for yourself? Personally, I still think the wife did it. I do. She's very suspicious, but she's really good at not looking suspicious. Maybe I'll change my mind with another watch, but at this point, I don't know, something's off about her. I do not think that the son had any involvement, which would be physically impossible because he wasn't home. So, I don't know. My love, I just want you to know that I'm not that monster you know. Everything you hear in the trial, it's twisted. It wasn't like that. All right, thanks. Bye.
I don't know what happened. I think he fell off that third floor. The window's open.